Welcome back to the bill.
LOL. The documentary's director, Alexander Stapleton, said in a statement, quote, this isn't just about the story of Sean, it's the story of Cassie and the story of the victims.
You done playing with donkeys and goats?
Okay.
Especially when you got them right there in your room. I don't know why it would
For the
take you some of
gravity,
the real things for you.
jump tries to fly. True.
French bulldog, $1 million in a suit. Oh, yeah, who the anyone saw that?
Okay. Um, so like, if you see right here, the doors are open, right? Right here is this block. That is the visible level. But I'm gonna continue. Right. Okay. So, okay. The doors.
By the way, yeah, we're talking cease and desist letter here, potential legal action, financial repercussions. You might not relate to all this. Let me tell you something that a lot of Americans relate to. Credit card debt. It's every fee, every high interest trap. It is existing in the stuff. Today's sponsor, though, CDS Debt, helps people fight back to raise credit cards, personal loans, and medical bills. CDS Debt has customized options to help you pay off debt faster. In fact, there's no minimum credit score required. Plus, they're A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau. The system can make you feel like you're drowning financially, which is why I want to develop solutions to your debt. It's your money, it's your future. Do not let the system decide for you. You're 30 seconds away from being debt free. Get your free assessment and find the best option for you right now at pdsdebt.com/sidebar. That's pdsdebt.com/sidebar. pdsdebt.com/sidebar. Yeah, it wasn't even really about the trial, maybe because that was oversaturated, maybe because everybody was watching our coverage here on Long Prom trial. And by the way, found out that my voice and Elizabeth Milner's voice was
Okay.
both in the documentary. I think it was the trial. It was interesting. I'll talk more. I am curious about what you think of that footage and talking about how it's back to the cease and desist letter. First of all, attorney-client privilege, because if he is actively, deliberately, knowingly recorded the privilege, he exists in the attorney. That's what
they expect to come down. My first thought was, this, we've never seen this before. This must be privileged. But again, you forget there's a videographer in the room. So when you think about a training plan communications, yes, they're usually covered under privilege. But if you have a third party that you're inviting into those communications that's not necessary, unless that person is an interpreter or maybe an accountant, if you have a videographer that's there not for legal reasons, you can make that argument that, the privilege is waived.
And by the way, that conversation, the actual context of it, it's something that we always
I hear you, puppy.
see. Let's just say it's a frustration.
Mhm.
Social media was portraying Diddy narrative. He was like, we're losing. He was getting that.
Yeah, let me turn off the one tablet or the phone.
It's
Okay?
like, did everything. It's supposed to deal apply. Everything you want. I came to New York, and like he was just waiting.
I hear you.
Arrested and indicted. And that was like a bit of tension there, which it's a rare behind the
I
scenes
just heard a
glimpse
dragon
of
at the
what
door.
those conversations and what those moments are between an accused and their.
You can give me the raptor anytime. Yes.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people are talking about, again, you don't usually get a window into that.
Okay.
I think the push and pull was, in the conversation, Mark and Nicola had said, look, an indictment hasn't been dropped yet. The indictment came down September 16th of last year, so, and Mark and Nicola had said it's mid-September at that point, so I think the indictment was really drop. So at that point, Pat Diddy, who, he said, look, you're basically surrendered. His legal team is taking the position.
Nope, that's mine.
Kind of show that you're ready to take this head on. But then Diddy's sort of saying, we need to get someone out there on the comms front, as somebody who's, in his words, has dealt with the dirty side of media and propaganda. So I think what Diddy was trying to say was, there's nothing to be done legally on the criminal front because no indictment had been dropped yet. But in the court of public opinion, it seemed like he wanted to take a more aggressive approach to put a certain message out there, and his attorney seemed to kind of think the opposite.
And just to be clear, so the documentary is shot in his hotel room in New York. This is, I believe, just 6 days before his arrest last year. Turns out Holmes had hired this videographer to film him while he's in New York. The documentary's producers got their hands on this footage. And he's talking on speakerphone with Mark and Nicholas, high-powered attorney. By the way, just one of several lawyers he would have on his multi-person legal team. And says that
I do. Come here.
help his public image, that it appeared to him like they were losing. And remember, again, this is before he was officially indicted and arrested. Apparently, he knew it was coming. He'd been under investigation for months at this point. In his state to NBC News, Cohen's published do that hangover. It's like, quote, it was created for entirely different purpose. I think the never completed. No rights were yes. Outside
You already got yours.
for Netflix to use unlicensed private material. None of this Mr. Cohen's or his team.
You know he's not going to share with me.
Raises serious questions
He don't
about
even
how
love
it
you.
was obtained and why Netflix chose to use it. Now, Elizabeth, we're going to talk more about what Cohen's legal team has to say in the cease and desist letter, but what's your reaction?
Yeah, it's hard to say because there's still such a big question mark in the air because, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, is one of the executive producers on this series. Him, the director, Netflix in general, is not saying where they got the footage, only that it was obtained legally. Diddy side is saying this is coming from a videographer I hired. I know we'll get into the cease and desist. One of the arguments they make is, this is subject to NDAs or agreements that the videographer signed with Diddy because he was, employed by Diddy. And therefore the footage belongs to Diddy. That's the argument that they're making. It's difficult to say because Netflix is not really saying how or where they got this footage from. One of the things that they did say was that it was sent to them legally. So
Awesome.
if you have the videographer sending the footage to them physically, that would be fine. But it does leave a question mark about where the legal rights are coming from. The only really avenue I see is if there's someone that's a videographer obtaining a license for the footage, then the videographer would have the ability to take
just
that
being
license
nice.
and transfer the footage over to Netflix. But the footage belongs to Diddy, then that's a little bit tough.
Exactly nice.
Okay, let's keep that in mind and talk about
Yes.
I do want to talk about the content
Is she a sweet baby?
Featured interviews with many people who are on Cohen's inner
What do you
circle.
think,
This
Pop?
includes Aubrey O'Day, who was a member of the girl group Dan Buchanan, which was created on Cohen's MTV show Making the Band. She has since accused Combs of basically grooming her, firing her for refusing to give in to his alleged sexual advances. We have Albie Shore, singer, songwriter, former record executive, dated Kim Porter before she was in a relationship with Combs. There's Roger Bond, one of Combs' parents' former bodyguards, who's gone on the record to say that he knew Combs was allegedly physically violent with his then girlfriend, Cassie. At one point in his interview with the documentary's producers, he said of Combs, "When I first met him, I liked him as a person because I didn't know him." You have Kalina Harper, who was part of Combs' group Diddy Dirty Money, released a statement supporting him after the third member of that group, Don Richard, had filed a lawsuit against Combs. And in the documentary, Combs can be heard calling Harper to complain about the lawsuit, asking her to put out a statement. Former friend, business partner of Combs, who appears throughout the documentary, is Kirk Burroughs, the co-founder of Bad Boy Records. The two apparently worked very closely together for years. Burroughs served as the general manager and rapidly growing company's funds. And according to Burroughs, when they started Bad Boy, Burroughs was given a 25% stake in the company, with the other 75% other gents. And we're going to get more into why Burroughs alleges it was set up that way in just a second. But according to Burroughs, Combs allegedly threatened him in 1996 with a baseball.
Licking my hand, like washing my hand.
So Burroughs lawsuit was
Okay,
thrown out.
I'm back. Sorry.
And more recently, Burroughs sued Janice Combs for fraud. Combs was to upset over harassment. And those appeared to
Celebrate.
that he's blacklisted from the Kingdom decree, led to periods of homelessness since the music industry starting pop life in the teens. This is all the perks and all. So Elizabeth, there's a lot. But what did you make of the Burroughs part where he's proving, this kind of relationship that he had? Worse to get a state from a multi-million-dollar company. I mean, I guess the allegation is basically that Diddy ruined his life.
Yeah, that was a really, there are a lot of difficult moments in the documentary. I watched all 4 episodes as mentioned, and that was a tough one. And again, information that we hadn't really seen before in prior documentaries. So, this is someone who had co-founded Bad Boy Entertainment with him. A lot of the things he was saying seemed to kind of run along the theme that I think prosecutors were trying to push in the actual case, was that in the prosecutor's view, this is somebody who will do anything to basically get what he wants. He doesn't really care what effects or damage that causes to other people. And it's in different ways, right? Whether it's in the context of alleged abuse, business disputes, alleged sexual assaults, things that have been alleged in the civil lawsuits against him. And I think with Burroughs, it was really, kind of seemed to strike that theme as well. Because he's saying, he had forced me out of the state of my company. He had to deal with things like homelessness. Well, in the 2000s and 2010s, he was really prospering, music, business, fashion. And one of the things that he said when he alleged in the documentary, again, this is an allegation from him, was that really entertainment, Combs' name was not really involved in the side. And one of the things he's saying is that he said, well, that's good, really having to pay any liability from, the same basketball game that had happened in the early 90s, where he was subject to multiple death lawsuits because of the multiple deaths that had occurred as a result of that basketball game that he was behind organizing. So that was really, surprising.
Yeah, that was a big allegation, because the family's skilled in that. It was horrible. One Holmes charity basketball game. The game took place at the gymnasium at the City College of New York. And according to the New York Daily News, before the basketball game, people who worked outside, they broke a window, with the entrance of the gym. The crowd got down there, couldn't get the doors open. People started. 9 people died. That's just one. So, docuseries devoted a lot of time to the killings of 24 and alleged connections to this, to both men, obviously. East Coast, West Coast, back to the 90s, there was just talk that it could have involved like clear these allegations. The series, though, emphasizes that he had never been investigated or charged regarding their assassinations. Nevertheless, Several interviewees during this documentary expressed that Combs' actions seemed suspicious in hindsight. The documentary plays part of an interview that Dwayne "Keepy D. Davis did with investigators related to Tupac's murder, which had been played. And on the tape, PBD says that Combs agreed to pay him if he killed Tupac and also rival record label head Suge Knight. Now, Davis allegedly admitted that his nephew Orlando Anderson was the one who shot the man killing Tupac, injuring Knight. But Davis says Combs never came through with any payment. And by the way, Davis is currently awaiting trial for Tupac's murder in Las Vegas. Combs has always denied any involvement in the assassination. That was a big, I would say, Elizabeth, that was a big part of this. I didn't know that was a part of this documentary.
I'm really surprised as well. So I believe it's the second episode where people want to turn into it. And like you said, there have been insinuations in the past. They played video clips of, Sean Combs being asked in prior interviews in the 90s and 2000s, do who killed these men? Did you have any involvement? He's always denied it. To be clear, these are just allegations. But yeah, it's really, really shocking. And one of the sort of a little bit more of the backstory behind his alleged involvement with Tupac was that a lot of the interviewees in the documentary were saying that Biggie, who was signed with Bad Boy and who's really close with Diddy at the time, was starting to form a friendship with Tupac, and they were getting really close. So yeah, they really appreciate that. So I think that a lot of the themes that you see in this needing to be the person in people's lives, whether it was personal, business, and it's really interesting because you see a lot of the themes that again the prosecution was trying to put forward that we saw in his personal life with Sandra Ventura always being number one, not necessarily regarding the damages he's doing to other people in the prosecution's eyes, right? Putting out the business sense. So the backstory is that the friendship that was forming between Biggie and Tupac and therefore, that's where his alleged involvement came in.
Get out of here.
In terms of the non-payment,
Yeah.
that's something we saw happening over and over in the documentary. I was treated out of my China company. I wasn't paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. And allegedly, that's sort of how he treated the artists that were on his. Again, that's number one, and not necessarily giving people their due, business sense or perfect personal sense.
Okay, so with that, I will tell you, I think one of the most shocking allegations of Smalls, okay? You talk about finances, you talk about one of the biggest names at the NBC, very close friends with Sean Combs. Well, according to Kirk Burrows, according to Kirk Burrows, Combs insisted that Biggie travel to Los Angeles as part of the album tour. This is despite serious dangers that were present from the rivalries of East Coast, West Coast. Once there, Combs allegedly decided to cancel a trip that Biggie was supposed to take to the UK, instead saying he needed to stay in LA. Combs apparently threw a large party, and after which, someone opened fire on the car that Biggie was riding in, killing him. Burrows alleged that Combs used all of this publicity around Biggie's murder and his massive funeral to just gain his own fame for his own shooting to the top of the charts with the song "Missing You," which featured, by the way, Biggie's widow. This was one salacious claim that I really. According to Burrows,
Oh, is that okay? Yeah, this is so bad.
to Biggie's estate and had Biggie's recently renegotiated contract changed to make it more favorable for Bad Boy Records and less favorable to Biggie's lawyer after his death. Elizabeth, that one I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, person expected, and again, I think it speaks to the strength of the documentary, just at least creatively and what they were able to get in terms of the interviewees, claims that we hadn't heard before. So the claims were that, he had wanted in the documentary, the interviews talk about Diddy had said, we need to put on the biggest funeral New York has ever seen for Biggie. And when apparently, allegedly, when he saw how much it would cost, that's when he had said, we'll be funding this to be a monthly. One of the other things was he had wanted to put out that song about Biggie after he had passed away, and that was really a big moment. He had to go in at the MTV Movie Award. And then one of the other claims was, he was supposed to debut on the cover of Rolling Stone or the cover of Rolling Stone. He says after he had passed, Sean Combs had called him and said, I'm coming out with my first solo album, I need that cover. So Sean Combs had allegedly taken that cover from Biggie even after he had passed away. And again, it kind of rides to this theme of, in the public, his friend had passed away, he was devastated, but sort of what you see behind the scenes of this documentary, but like using that to help benefit him financially and in terms of his career, which is something that we hadn't seen before. And even myself, like I'm sure you empathize Jesse as a millennial, not seeing Diddy, knowing the backstory of him and Biggie, and sort of knowing that song, and thinking, oh, they were close friends, they tripped his friend, they're so moving, and then to hear all of his allegations, it really paints another picture.
I remember when that happened. About dedicating a song to his close friend. I mean, it hit an emotional chord. He looked at it in a totally different light. Now, these are again a different narrative, a different allegation. We're trying to piece it together. I do want to get into the jurors. Okay, so let me the jurors of trial. Before we do, let me just highlight a couple more things, and then we'll get into the jurors and the cease and desist letter. So one gripping moment in the series, I got to call it out, came with Aubrey O'Day, his former Danity team member, who spoke out against after passing the lawsuit. Reads this application from another unidentified person that detailed an alleged sexual assault again. In that affidavit, the witness said he walked in on Combs and another man performing sex acts on O'Day. Said he would be completely creative. It was just lying there. O'Day became emotional when she was reading this, saying she never actually seen this document. The verdict that it's just, it's really someone else is the producer, Bobby, he was also so as we talked about a lot here on sidebar, he detailed several of the incidents that he previously included in the lawsuit against me, including that he believes Combs drugged him on multiple occasions. He also claims that he worked with Combs for a year on the last album he put out, actually living with Combs during that time. But his allegation is he claims he never got paid for his work.
So roast out.
Sure that he get paid eventually. And then he was
That almost done.
and now okay, so you were two of the jurors who served on the jury during Combs' federal criminal trial. Juror 75 and juror 160. They spoke about the jury verdict. Juror 75 saying, we saw both sides of it, and we came with our conclusion. Juror 160 said that she never felt like Combs was being coercive toward the jury, agreeing that sometimes he would look over at them, nod his head, saying it didn't seem.
Sorry, this is best type of good. But if you have like funny stuff, then you can add on to that.
Some docu-series wondered if, despite their best efforts, they could still influence the proper discourse going on around them. But Elizabeth, these two jurors out there, what stood out to you about their comments? And is anything that they say, in your opinion, affect the verdict?
Yeah, so this was so fascinating. You very rarely hear from jurors publicly, especially on such a high-profile trial like this, and especially on camera. So I think that was a real coup for them to be able to get these two jurors to come on camera. I think it spoke to two things we saw in the trial. So the first juror, who's a younger female juror, had talked about, I think, the issue of what she saw as lack of credibility or the evidence that was being presented. So one of the things that she talked about was when Capricorn Clark, who had worked for Chief for a number of years, came on the stand. She had talked about, being her allegations were that she was kidnapped, that she was forced to go with Diddy when Diddy allegedly wanted to, commit physical harm upon Kid Cudi. And one of the things that the juror had said was that she found some credibility issues with Capricorn Clark, that her testimony was overly emotional, but she was testifying to things that happened a decade ago. So it goes to sort of the issue of credibility. And also, one of the things that she had said was, that video of him and Cassie in the hallway was devastating, but domestic violence, DV, was not one of the charges. So I think it kind of spoke to the issue that's for the jurors had of the jurors love black and white evidence. They love videos, they love photos, they love sort of that being caught red-handed moment. So TV was one of the charges. Obviously, I think he would have been convicted just based on that video. But I think she kind of spoke to the issue of it, at least the juror's eyes, and what we saw from the was where was that evidence of coercion in terms of trafficking, sort of that physical evidence from what the verdict.
Most of the box.
The other juror, who's an older gentleman, had talked about the nature of the relationship between Cassie and Diddy. And I thought that was really fascinating because one of the things he had said was, we heard testimony from her about what his relationship was, but she kept going back. So one of the things he had said was, if you don't like something, you get out. And I think that kind of speaks to maybe the difficulty that some of the jurors had of understanding the nuance between two people in this kind of volatile relationship. I know, the trial had experts to come and testify about the emotional ways that can play out, but I think that spoke to two themes: the nature of the evidence, and then also difficulty in kind of understanding the back and forth relationship and why Cassandra Mentor would go back given how she was being treated.
Well, we say all this to say it's not surprising that Sean Combs and his team are not happy about this, okay? Which now we go back to the C&D letter, the cease and desist letter that Combs' lawyers sent to Netflix's chief legal officer. That's what I want to focus on. Okay, so according to attorney Michael Tremonti, they had already sent a cease and desist letter to the streaming service in July of 2024. This is before Combs was even indicted. But now they send this new letter on December 1st, the day before the documentary was set to be released, and essentially calling it a hit piece. Quote, first, Netflix's promotion of the program as a documentary is fundamentally misleading. In truth, the program is a hit piece. It was conceived and produced by Curtis James Jackson, aka 50 Cent, whose irrational fixation on destroying Mr. Combs' reputation is a matter of public record. The evidence of Mr. Jackson's vicious animus against Mr. Combs is overwhelming. He's been trolling Mr. Combs on the internet and social media for years and has made a career of attempting to defame, belittle, and provoke Mr. Combs and turn the public against him. We provided ample evidence of Mr. Jackson's avowed hatred of Mr. Combs in our prior cease and desist letter dated July 3rd, 2024, and since that time, Mr. Jackson's determination to take down Mr. Combs has increased dramatically. Simply put, there is no one less able to view any aspect of Mr. Combs' life and legacy through a fair and objective lens. Given Mr. Jackson's central role in the project and his declared objective of disgracing Mr. Combs, Netflix cannot honestly market the program as a documentary, as that term falsely suggests it is based on facts. Instead, the program is based on fabrications born from Mr. Jackson's personal vendetta against Mr. Combs. For this reason alone, Netflix must withdraw the program. To be clear, recently, 50 Cent, who's been doing a media tour before this, has said, I don't have any hatred against Sean Combs. I've actually worked with and employed his son. In fact, that narrative. Now, according to Tremonti, Netflix had actually been in talks with Combs to make the show about the sudden cratering of his career. Quote, in or about 2023, CEO Ted Sarandos proposed that Netflix produce a documentary about Mr. Combs. However, Mr. Combs rejected the proposal when Mr. Sarandos insisted he give up creative control. Thus, the choice of Mr. Jackson to produce the program was Netflix's vindictive response to that rejection, an attempt by Netflix and Mr. Sarandos to ensure a one-sided character assassination rather than a balanced, accurate portrayal. Now, Elizabeth, you know about C&D letters, right? Very common in the media industry. This idea that this is in journalism, this is a hit piece, this is based on fabrications. What do you take away from this letter? Is there a strong, let's start with this part, this idea that it can't positively be called, it can accurately be called documentary. It's improper.
Yeah, it's not surprising that they tried to get out in front of this and tried to persuade Netflix not to come forward with it. I think it's an interesting argument because what they're claiming is, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, has had a long-standing, animosity against Diddy and sort of vice versa. And because he's at the helm, they're doing this seriously. This should sort of be seen as propaganda. But one of the things that Netflix hit back with was, yes, he's the executive producer. He doesn't necessarily have creative control. That's something we know, that just because you're the producer on a project doesn't mean that you have final creative say over, what the tone of the piece is going to be, how it's going to be depicting somebody. So it makes sense that they would use their argument. They're trying, and there's multiple arguments within the cease and desist letters about why they allege this is improper. So I wasn't surprised that they tried to use that argument. And again, like you said, 50 Cent has been the public face of this. He's been doing interviews about it since the documentary dropped. So I'm not surprised that they used it. I don't think it's necessarily the strongest argument to be made because, as you know, there's so many people that have their hands on this type of project, especially, one as lengthy as this. Just because he's the producer on it doesn't necessarily mean he has sort of final control of how it's going to come out. And also remember, it's Netflix. They produce esteemed and established documentaries for years and years. So I don't think all the people that are involved in a piece like this are going to, put it out with sort of a propaganda lens or this view to try to take Sean Combs down. The director of the piece had said, we wanted to be able to give the interviewees a chance to speak their truth and talk about their experiences.
Okay, let me go to the second argument. cease and desist letter and get your take on it. Second, Mr. Jackson's malice towards Mr. Combs is exacerbated by the payments he apparently offered to those who agreed to appear in the program. No serious studio would distribute a documentary in which the subjects were paid to offer testimonials consistent with producers' bias against the subject. For this reason also, Netflix must withdraw the program. Now, Netflix has disputed that anyone was paid for their participation, and there's lots of news programs who used to pay participants for their interviews. But do wonder, are there any actual legal limitations here? Elizabeth, what do you think?
Yeah, so that's true. So Netflix had come out and said nobody was paid for this documentary. That's their viewpoint. Like you said, there's many news organizations that refuse to pay for interviewees, just because it kind of goes to the credibility of the news organization. I think there's a little bit of a fine line between, pure news coverage and long form documentaries. There are some entertainment companies and production companies out there that will pay interviewees, depending on how much, or that will pay for access to certain materials, photos, videos, releases, things like that. But a lot of them don't, because, like as you said, it sort of goes to the issue of credibility. So here, Netflix is saying we did not pay anyone, and we haven't really seen evidence put forward yet by Combs' team that they have. So I think again makes sense that they would try to use that argument. But again, even if some interviewees have been paid, I don't think that necessarily scrapes away at the integrity of the project. I think it's just case by case. Some companies pay for interviewees, some don't. Here Netflix is saying they didn't. So, that's, you kind of have to take what they're both sides are saying at face value.
Okay, let's go into the third argument. So the cease and desist letter's third argument arguably might be maybe its strongest. The claim that Netflix broke copyright laws by using media that didn't belong to them. Quote, Netflix is poised to publish content, including intimate personal information that it obtained in violation of the Copyright Act, Mr. Combs' privacy rights, and in breach of numerous non-disclosure, non-disparagement, and intellectual property agreements about which Netflix is or should be aware. For example, it appears that Netflix possesses and intends to rebroadcast portions of video recordings of Mr. Combs that are his property, but which employees and independent contractors illicitly disclosed to Netflix in violation of binding contractual prohibitions against that disclosure. By distributing video recordings exclusively owned by Mr. Combs and
I
controlled
think
by Mr. Combs,
that
Netflix
is enough building for today.
Is there any
And
grounds for this? Copyright infringement?
real quick,
That's where the numbers really get into serious pain. Talking about.
Yeah, so I agree this was probably their strongest argument they set forth. I was kind of surprised they didn't place it as sort of the first argument within the cease and desist, because usually the rule is for any motion or cease or desist or any legal document, you start out with the strongest argument first,
you
and work your
know,
way down. But right, so that's the
see
thing
ya
that they're
in
claiming
the
is that this
next
usage of this
one.
to his attorney